remember the title, the former title of this book. And then this afternoon I remembered it, Occidental Periods. That was the title that was unceremoniously tossed out by my editors. I say that mostly from my point of view. So anyway, I thought I would read, these poems are divided into 3 sections. I'm going to read, I think, primarily from the middle section, which is called To Market. And it's from a traditional English nursery rhyme. It's also part of the title, was used in a novel by, whose name escapes me now, Plum Bum. It's the title of the book, but I can't recall the author. Anyway, the nursery rhyme is, to market, to buy a penny bun, home again, market is done. And so these poems in this section are, I guess, in part about the United States. There are several poems about Somalia. In fact, I'm going to start with a couple of poems about Somalia. Really poems about the history of Somalia, but also about, and why Somalia? Because in 2006 and 2007, you may recall that Somalia was in the news a lot because of the Somali pirates who were active on the Indian Ocean. Anyway, this poem is called Exadilla. The soft cells of distance, tele, email, text, post, augur revenues lower than those projected by prevailing sentiment. The philosophical minds of first responders, hands-on, on-site likes. Nevertheless, the value of distance, I axis that corners the market, climbs into a car already crowded with service refugees seeking civic and moral credit as the victims of natural phenomena absorbed as human disaster ad lib off script and crawl, walk, or run guns out of the frame. Retrofit lifeboats with rebuilt motors, powerful enough to chase big game out in the trade lanes of the Indian Ocean. As for Waki, Allah, Yahweh, and God, names for the earthquake off the coast of Sumatra, for the tsunami sent to wipe out the lives and livelihoods of coastal fishermen far from Zaire, where Range Rovers packed with televisions, mattresses, computers, and furniture race out of town ahead of believers armed with harem but short on cash. In the wake of a storm to come. Outbreak jets of the British Empire, part scramble for Africa, part passenger pigeons blocking the sun for days on end before blue sky cast as overhead against pieces of the Horn cost flotsam in the Gulf and ocean. Makeshift scows adrift in one Gishka rode off, chewing cot, wading through dreams of PT boats, his fishing pole, the rod of Moses, big fish in the desert, jerk on the line, Gishka jerks, awake, intent, breakfast, and if he's lucky, breakfast tomorrow. For one man, a moment, no father shot dead by heart security guards, no grandfather languishing in some overseas prison for trying to jumpstart the Fisheries Protection Agency, no freighters on the horizon, flat as a flow from the Nasson Shelf, just Gishka and a piece of sea life on the hook for everything. So I said, I think I mentioned this morning that a large part of this book deals with my returning to interests in, I guess you could use the term Egyptology, I suppose. But also there's an ecological dimension to some of the poems in this book too. And so this is called Save as Water. For the desert nomads, oasis is a placeholder for the placelessness of paradise. Exclusive rights to stay the middle of nowhere, where the prose flowing underground and the light verse falling from above rhyme the garden green with red hyacinths. For the travelers tempted to move on, temples beneath their tents. A body of water, a scar of land, echo of the mute barrier between the calls to prayer for the next bending back to look up at islands rising into a blank sky, level with the ground on which one kneels to wash the body with sand. For Set drives the waters back to heaven, desert storms stirred up by Seth annihilate the alien akin to the prophet. Satik, turning his face away to save his servant as Satish, the face always in the back of the head, slowly revolves into view, confounding sight. The fires too, forged in bodies of water, preserve salt, fires that will never slake the thirst of temples, much less bodies driven by fire, by thirst. For water, land, and bodies, for rest always blocked by the grave, the crypt and tombs and wombs, worlds to come, a new body forged in the likeness of earth, largely water. So, I think most of you won't remember the story of how John F. Kennedy became, not how he became president, but how he became an important senator a congressman who eventually became president. It was his father who got a reporter John F. Kennedy was in the Navy. His PT boat was attacked, and the story goes that he rescued 3 sailors. And in one of the stories, he rescued the sailors by pulling him ashore as he swam with his teeth. That was the story his father, Joseph K., put out. But it won him notoriety, and eventually he became president. So the title of this poem is the beginning of an interview that John F. Kennedy, when he was asked the question, how did he become president? And this was his answer. It was easy. They sank my boat. Quips the future free world leader, downplaying the Harvard man as war hero, who did not go down with their starboard aft, but clung to the floating wreckage with other survivors led to follow his wake. When he swam out of the Blackett Strait to Ferguson Passage, towing a wounded crewman with his teeth until they reached Olasanda as castaways for 6 days before the 7th, when Solomon Islanders rescued them. A tale teeming with peril and redemption, just as Joseph had hoped when he pulled a few strings to get a stringer to play up the harrowing ordeal of his second son, that next to last chance, a backstory buried at sea with the actual Pequot torpedo boat 109, resurrected as a replica of the future inaugural ask, not parade, end quote. Sorry, I lost my place here. So, earlier today we were talking about archives and libraries. So this poem is called ADAM, or I should say that's the acronym. And if there are any librarians in here, you know that ADAM stands for Acquisition, Development, Access, and Management. Acquisition. The political stances of the ocean's Apolis Sands people are a function of their distances from the landlocked fulcrum and are measured per a battery of spoken prepositions, e.g. to, for, at. Development. Burned by the broad performances of a blind sun, Ito Chuda, one of the worst architects, deploys a red cloud, his umbrella and zeppelin, to carry him over the Ganges, to tarry on the Bosphorus. Access. A shrine, a university gate, ways to and out of the gods pouring out red ahadath as they pass overhead and below on their ways to other polydiverses. Management. Dead hand control means a legible acronym of irrecoverable or non-existent knowledge. Object agent. This is a poem about an actual library, the Haskell Free Library, which was founded by, as you'll hear in the first line, the Canadian wife of a wealthy American merchant. Endowed by, quote, the Canadian wife of a wealthy American merchant, the Haskell Free Library is less substrate made veneer, less a medium corroding inscription from a trowel, brush, or husband than the soft architectonics of dissent, the centered nexus of a common culture, evading the borderline, meandering back and forth across the 45th parallel, tracking the Buzzy Roy's indifference to the new checkpoints and automatic weapons as he heads toward the pizzeria, a tangent intercepted by free world guards. Free Buzzy placards jostling above the rebels from Sanstead, Quebec, and Derby Line, Vermont. A petite involvement through a line of flower pots, an opening through which Martha Haskell rises as a name, even with history. The story behind that Haskell Library is that in the wake of 9/11, American and Canadian citizens who had once been able to cross back and forth to go to the library, which is situated right on the American-Canadian border, were no longer able to do that. And this guy, Buzzy Fuzz, that's what they called him, he was arrested by American guards because he was going to a pizzeria on the American side. So I'm going to read two more. There's several poems in here about Islam, the history of Islam. But this is about the time before Islam, which is, well, I guess the American translation or English translation would be the Dark Ages. But the Arab is Ahaleya, after Thoth. Blue, green, gray, water footprints in profile point in one direction. Imprint right east, heel a stride away. Tamp down point, step over non-point left-handedness. Basin, groundwaters, the lake of books burns forever. Thought, intelligence, knowledge, wisdom, logic, reason, measure, writing, magic, secrets. Ibis and baboon-headed judge and court stenographer weigh and record the souls on and in file. Petroglyphs of underground petroleum deposits. Placemakers make way for the wayfarers of the desert. Sail across the sands, all thanks to Ra, steady at their backs, billowing chests. They pull out mobiles, click on trees, the anime of life, save as oars. And the last poem is called Burn the Book of Life. Apparently, one of the great things that one could do as a scholar of Islam was, after completing years and years of studying and compiling manuscripts, as an act of faith, was to burn your books right before your death. So this is a quote from Abu Hamam Tawhidi. Still, I follow in burning these books the model of leading masters who are to be emulated, whose guidance is embraced, and whose fire is sought by the dim-sighted. Rumored wildfires, a Christian mob, a harbor of burning ships, the book to Claymore Books moot, spread to forests after immolating tree lines, Alexandria, Antioch. Ticknor and Smithson notwithstanding, the librarian has never been able to bend his patron to his purpose, and thus adult education is poorly served by this public fount of voracious omniscience, which deigns to, quote, irrigate the surrounding wastelands of human ignorance, but hoards its nectar while drenching the plains, waters rising to flood proportions, in Noah, a cloud above, no land or water. Burn the book of life, and the cuneiforms solidify in the purifying fires of papyri, leather, and wax. Burn the book of life, and the last 3 books of a Sibyl must be purchased at great cost, a complete collection. Burn the book of life, and the northern wall of the incinerated Persepolis fortification archive collapses onto spared clay tablets, encaving the sleepers long before Ephesus. Burn the book of life, and the trial of the Talmud ends in conviction as the scroll burns, but the letters fly up in the air. Burn the book of life, and Abdul Qadir Hadera transfers manuscripts from the Ahmad Bada Institute of Higher Learning and Islamic Research to locations unknown, a metaphor eluding the fleeing literalists of Ansar Dine. Burn the book of life, and the kneeling drink from a tigress black with ink. Thanks.